Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. There's even a brand new Brigadier General tier where you can get a shout out on a Commander's Quarters episode that's dedicated to you. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So the year of 2021 is officially in the books, so now it's time to take a look back to see what in the world came out this year and what the most overpowered cards in Commander are. So I'm going to take you through some incredibly powerful cards that came out this year. And okay, just a quick disclaimer, or a couple disclaimers before we jump into them. First up, obviously, these cards are 100% based off of my own opinions, and your opinions might differ, and that's okay. I might not bring up a card that you think is overpowered, and yeah, please comment below and let me know why I should have brought that one up. Also, since these picks are from my perspective, they are going to be from a more casual perspective since I am not a competitive EDH player. So there might be a card from this year that is absolutely broken in EDH, but because it doesn't see casual play, it might not see this list. Also, since I've already gone over the most powerful commanders this year in a different episode, legendary creatures are not being considered for this episode, so keep that in mind. And one more thing, a big thank you to Eddie, Alec, and Eric for your input on this list and all your help throughout, well, the entire year of 2021. So now with all that said, let's jump into it. So the first card that I want to highlight is Dothi Voidwalker, which is an extremely overpowered card for, well, a lot of reasons. I mean, this card just keeps going on and on and on, and it's just like they keep stapling things on top of it that they didn't really need to. Regardless, it's a 3/2 Dothi Rogue with Shadow that costs black. Now, Shadow is a very old mechanic, which basically means that this creature can only block or be blocked by only creatures with Shadow. So basically, it's unblockable because most players aren't running Shadow creatures, but it also can't block creatures. So on top of being a 3/2 unblockable creature for 2 mana, it also says if a card will be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, instead exile it with a void counter on it. So first up, this is already a fantastic hate bear against our opponent's graveyards. Whether your opponents want to mill things into their graveyard to get access to them, or they want to tutor something into their graveyard, or sacrifice creatures to get them there, or, you know, have a death trigger occur, none of that's going to happen. Because again, for 2 mana, you've got a 3/2 hate bear that is unblockable. But on top of that, again, like I mentioned, they just kept stapling things on top of this. Tap, sacrifice Dothi Voidwalker, choose an exiled card an opponent owns with a void counter on it. You may play it this turn without paying its mana cost. I mean, there's pushed, and then there is this card. Again, they literally could have stopped at that second part. They could have stopped without this activated ability, and it still would have been a rare card. They also could have put restrictions on this, like, hey, you can play it this turn, and you can spend mana as though or mana of any color to actually play that card. That would still be incredibly powerful, but no, this is just, hey, there's no restrictions at all, just, you know, pay 2 mana, get this down when things go into your opponent's graveyards, or they would. Instead, you exile them, and then in perpetuity, you can just sacrifice this and cast any of those cards for free. It doesn't matter how much mana that card was, you are casting it for free. Oh, and by the way, those things that are exiled with void counters on them stay exiled with void counters on them, so if you've got a way to actually get Dothi Voidwalker back into play, you get access to those cards again. Again, I would have loved to see the actual valuation process for this card, because at this point, it just pretty much seems like, no, that's not good enough. No one will play it if it's only a 3/2 unblockable that is a hate bear. We also need to throw something else on there. Okay, maybe you can get access to those cards. But no, paying mana, that's just too much work. So you know what? Just cast it for free. So it probably went something like that. Anyways, Dothi Voidwalker, incredibly overpowered card from this year. Moving on, next up, let's talk about another mono black card from this year that is incredibly overpowered with the Meathook Massacre. This is a legendary enchantment for X black, and when it enters the battlefield, each creature gets -X until end of turn. So this is a flexible board wipe on an enchantment, which again might seem a little weird until you keep reading. Because it says, whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. My goodness, that is some kind of an effect, on top of this being a board wipe. Oh, and just because we'll just throw that on there anyways as well, whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you gain 1 life, because why not? Again, even if this was just an enchantment that did not have an ETB or, have that X cost in it that just cost black, and it said, whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life, you'd probably still play that card. In fact, you definitely would. It's again like a harder to deal with version of like a Zulaport Cutthroat or a Blood Artist, because again it's an enchantment which is tougher to deal with than a creature. So you'd still run that, but on top of that again, they made it into a flexible board wipe that can just wipe out your opponents by this just even coming down. With the right build around this, which again is most likely going to be an aristocrat style strategy, which there are plenty of decks out there, you just need a bunch of creatures in play, you get this out, you're going to wipe out a lot of creatures, probably including your own, and if not, you've got sacrifice outlets to take your creatures out too, to drain your opponents incredibly quickly. So yes, this card is definitely up to its mythic standards and then some, and yes, this thing is most definitely one of the most overpowered cards of 2021. Moving on, and I try to keep this show as PG friendly as possible, so Darn, let's just call it that. Darn is a sorcery for black, and it says destroy target creature. A creature destroyed this way can't be regenerated, and it's got overload for 2 black. It's actually kind of ironic now thinking about it. There are plenty of cards out there that I've used in episodes before, like Overseer of the Damned, and Army of the Damned, and Bonfire of the Damned, I've even talked about before too, and I'm okay saying those names, but for some reason I don't want to say this one. Let's just leave it at that. Anyways, Darn is a darn good card. This is essentially a flexible Wrath of God. At 2 mana, you can destroy any creature, and then if you overload it for just Wrath of God price, you destroy all creatures and they can't be regenerated. Wrath of God is a staple for a reason, and this just laughs in the face of that card and says, I'll do you one better. Now, obviously, its color identity is going to be more restrictive than Wrath of God, because you need to be in a deck that has both black and white, but there are plenty of decks out there that really want a card like this. So yeah, Darn is a darn good card, and yes, I'm going to keep saying that, okay? Moving on, let's talk about another incredible Wrath from this year with Vanquish the Horde. It's a sorcery for 6 white, but you're never going to be paying that, and actually, if you do, I'm really questioning what you are doing, because it's going to cost 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield, so if you actually paid its full cost, there are no creatures on the battlefield, which is kind of pointless to actually cast this then, because it says destroy all creatures. That was a very roundabout way of saying, hey, this card should basically cost you 2 mana probably every time you're casting it. This is essentially the mono-white version of Blasphemous Act. And Blasphemous Act is definitely a staple in Commander for a reason. While Blasphemous Act is basically a 1 mana board wipe, this is essentially a 2 mana board wipe, again in the vast majority of situations, and it can take out creatures that have even higher toughness than Blasphemous Act can, though it still can't take out indestructible creatures, etc. Still, again, when it comes to the expected cost of a Wrath being 4 mana, getting a 2 mana discount on that is pretty incredible. Now, yes, like Blasphemous Act, there are going to be certain situations where there are only going to be a few creatures on the board and you still need to wipe the board and you have to pay a little more, but come on, the vast majority of the time, you're just getting a 2 mana Wrath instead of having to pay 4. So yeah, I would definitely say Vanquish the Horde is an overpowered card from 2021. Let's move away from the Wraths though, and now onto another white card with Esper Sentinel. It's a 1/1 artifact creature human soldier for a white, and it says whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell each turn, draw a card unless that player pays X for X's Esper Sentinel's power. So this card is pretty incredible, and I would say actually like its comparable card with Mystic Remora, probably more necessary and high-powered in those higher-powered metas like EDH. That being said, even in a casual meta, this is a very low-cost investment for potentially drawing a good amount of cards throughout the game. The comparable card, again, Mystic Remora, has an initial low cost, but it does have a built-up cumulative upkeep over time that is going to cost more and more and more, whereas this one, you just pay 1 mana and you're done. And obviously, if you can pump the power of Esper Sentinel, you're going to be making it so that taxing effect costs even more. So again, even though this is probably a more impactful card in EDH, it can still be incredibly impactful in a casual meta as well. And speaking of an incredibly impactful card, let's talk about Hallbreaker Horror. It is a 7/8 Kraken horror that has flash and it can't be countered for 5 blue, but we're not done quite just yet. Because it also says, whenever you cast a spell, choose up to 1. Return target spell you don't control to its owner's hand, return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. This is another one of those cards where it's like, my goodness, you just keep stapling things onto this, don't you? I'm not sure that that flash or that this spell can't be countered was necessary, given the fact that this is a 7/8 that has that trigger whenever you cast any spell, not non-creature spell, any spell. This is an absolutely incredible card that can help you out in an absurd amount of situations. First up, your opponents can't stop you from casting it because it can't be countered, and then when they try to get rid of it, essentially any card in your hand, I should say any instant in your hand, basically becomes a remand. Okay, without the draw, but still, you basically can temporarily counter a spell by bouncing it back to their hand. So this is fantastic protection for itself or for whatever else, or for just, denying your opponents from casting certain things. And obviously it can be a great finisher as well by allowing you to bounce any non-land permanent back to its owner's hand. And keep in mind, again, with the, the lack of restrictions on this card, it does not say that an opponent controls. It is any non-land permanent, including your own. So yeah, there are ways also to use this as a combo engine, kind of like a Tidespout Tyrant, and this kind of like is just a souped up Tidespout Tyrant, which is already an incredibly powerful card, and yeah, they just basically souped it up and said, okay, we'll make it non-land instead of any permanent, but we'll just staple on extra things onto this. Yes, it does have a high converted mana cost, but it is most definitely an overpowered card from 2021. Speaking of which, next up, let's talk about Cultivator Colossus. Cultivator Colossus is a star trampling plant beast that costs 4 green. Its power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control, but that's not why this is a powerful card. It is because when it enters the battlefield, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. If you do, draw a card and repeat this process. Now, before we get further into this card, I just want to make a quick disclaimer. On the last video where I talked about this card, there were just some comments and there's some confusion as to what goes infinite with this, and some players were saying that bounce lands go infinite with it, and they do not. But there are still plenty of things that do go infinite with this, like Abundance, because Abundance is a replacement effect for your draw, so you basically can say, hey, yes, I'd like another land, cool, I'll put that into play. Hey, yes, I'd like another land, cool, I'll put that into play. So you essentially put every single land in your library into play. And then, yes, again, because this is a star based on the number of lands you control, sure, this thing is also just massive. But outside of comboing with this, yeah, this is still just an incredibly powerful card as is. It basically says, hey, how many lands are in your hand? Okay, let's get all those into play, and then probably some off the top of your library as well. Oh, and this is an ETB trigger that doesn't have it, if it was cast requirement, so have fun blinking this. My goodness, is this thing pushed. But now let's move on to one more green card with Unnatural Growth. Unnatural Growth is an enchantment for 1 green, and it says at the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. Now, I will say that the one probably saving grace for this card is that it has a very restrictive casting cost. Though if you are in green, obviously you've got access to plenty of ways to ramp and to fix your mana, so there's that too. But yeah, a 5 mana enchantment that essentially just doubles up the power and toughness of all of your creatures every single turn is incredible. When I first read this, I was thinking that it was going to be just on your turn, but no, it's each combat. That includes your opponent's turns as well. So other anthems get out of the way because Unnatural Growth is here. And yeah, there's also some powerful things that you can do with, powers or toughness matters that this can obviously impact, so there's that on top of all this. But now let's move on to a completely different card in red with Tybalt's Trickery. Tybalt's Trickery is an instant for 1 in a red and says counter target spell, choose 1, 2, or 3 at random. Its controller mills that many cards and exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card with a different name than that spell. They may cast that card without paying its mana cost, then they put the exile cards on the bottom of their library in a random order. So this is basically, hey red, now you get a counter spell. It's a chaotic counterspell, but it is a counterspell, and yeah, Chaos Warp sees a lot of play in this format for a reason, and now, yeah, red's got access to a counterspell as well. Now, you might counter something and mill a few cards, then exile into something even worse for the situation that you're in, but still, that's going to happen. It's red, it's chaos. But keep in mind that this card is actually a little more flexible than you might think because it doesn't specify that you can only counter an opponent's spell. So because of that, you can actually counter your own spell and hope for something even deadlier. In fact, I basically built an entire deck around this card in this interaction, so if you want to see that, make sure you check out my 97 lands deck built around the first sliver, Tibble Trickery, and of course, Blightsteel Colossus. It's pretty off the wall, but it's pretty fun. Anyways, let's now move on to some overpowered lands from this year, and let's start with the World Tree. The World Tree does enter the battlefield tapped, so it's got that going against it, but let's read the rest of the card. It taps for a green. It says as long as you control 6 or more lands you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color. This land literally could have stopped there, and it would have seen pretty much the same amount of play that it sees now. Actually, okay, I'm incorrect. It would have seen more play because actually this is just restricted to 5 color, but we'll get to that here in a second. Now the last part is pay white, white, blue, blue, black, black, red, red, green, green, or in other words, double Wooburg. Tap, sacrifice the World Tree, search your library for any number of god cards, put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So let's break this card down by answering a few questions. Would you like a chromatic lantern that does not take up a slot in your deck? Okay, it takes up a land slot, but that's it. Decks that have any gods in them, including god tribal decks. Would you like a win condition on a land as well? Cool. So yeah, this card is definitely overpowered. It definitely did not need that last part that is basically just a win condition for decks that run a bunch of gods. But they also kind of need to put that mana restriction on it, or it was just going to see play in basically all, probably 3, 4, and, obviously still 5 color decks that it could. Again, it does have that green restriction still on it. Yeah, that's a powerful land. Regardless, let's go on to another one. So let's talk about Ursus Saga. That's right, we've got an enchantment land, Ursus Saga. Yeah, this is a weird card. Its first lore counter is Ursus Saga gains tap, add a colorless. So that's nice, this land basically immediately gives you the ability to tap it for mana. What a concept. Anyways, its second lore counter says Ursus Saga gains, pay 2 and tap, create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token. With this creature gets +1 for each artifact you control. So make one of those Ursus constructs that can get bigger and bigger with the more artifacts you get in play. But the really spicy part on this card comes with that third lore counter, which is search your library for an artifact card with mana cost 0 or 1, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. So yes, when this gets to the third counter, you have to sacrifice it and you lose your land. But you can go tutor for something even better, like a Soul Ring, which can tap for 2. Or if you've got the money for it, a Mana Crypt if you already have your Soul Ring out. Or maybe a Jeweled Lotus, or a Skull Clamp, the list goes on and on and on. There are plenty of incredibly powerful artifacts out there at 0 and 1 mana, so have fun. And of course, if you can just keep getting this back out, this can just keep tutoring more things for you. So yeah, powerful land. But now let's talk about one final land from 2021 with Treasure Vault. It's an artifact land that can tap for a colorless, or you can pay XX and tap and sacrifice it to create X treasure tokens. So yeah, just use this as a regular land that comes into play, untap and taps for a colorless. It can also help you, if you've got artifact synergies in your deck, because this is an artifact land. But then when you're ready for a big explosive turn, well, just dump a bunch of mana into this beforehand, sacrifice it, make a ton of treasure tokens, and then on your turn, have fun. And that's not even talking about any kind of synergies that you can actually have with treasures or by sacrificing artifacts, etc, etc, etc. So yeah, Treasure Vault, a very, very good card from last year. But now it's time for me to wrap this show up. Thank you again for joining me in going through my 2021 picks for the most overpowered cards for Commander. And of course, I would love to hear your thoughts about my picks in the comments below. So yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Are there certain cards that I didn't mention that I should have? Do you think I'm overvaluing certain cards? So yeah, let me know in the comments below. And of course, as always, thanks again and have a good one.